Hello again, everyone. So this week's unit was on memory, specifically short-term memory. So what I liked about this chapter specifically was the remembering recap questions that were scattered throughout the chapter. After flipping through the book, I'm just a little disappointed to see that they appear to only be in the two chapters on memory, as I find questions like that to be a particularly effective study tool for those that choose to answer them as they read through the chapter. Which brings me to my topic for this unit, studying techniques. So a few years ago, in another psychology course I was taking, one thing our instructor taught us was that memories aren't stored in any one particular place in the brain, but are actually encoded into whatever part of the brain is active at the time the memory is formed. So what he told us was that to study more effectively, what you need to do is to interact with the material in as many ways as possible. You want to activate as many parts of the brain as possible when interacting with the material, because then it'll be easier to retrieve the information later, like when you're taking a test, for example. So his suggestion for a good way to interact with the material in different ways was to form study groups and discuss the material, because that would require you to first read the material in the book and then discuss it with other people, which will allow you to hear the material, and you have to critically think about the material to have an active discussion if it's any discussion that's worthwhile, especially if you're trying to explain something. I found over the years that to understand something is completely different than understanding something well enough to explain it to somebody else. If you can understand material well enough to explain it to another person that doesn't understand it, and your explanation makes sense, then you understand the material well enough to pass any kind of test you're going to take on it. And then another suggestion my instructor had for studying was to study in a classroom setting, or whatever setting that you'd be taking the test in, because it's easier to retrieve memories in the particular place that those memories are made. So if you learn the material in a classroom, if you study the material in a classroom, it'll be easier to retrieve the material when you're taking the test in a classroom. Unfortunately for me, I don't do particularly well in study groups. I prefer to study alone. And I typically don't have the time to study at school. So what I found effective for me is to, when I'm reading the material, to have sort of a mock conversation. So I imagine that somebody's asking me questions about the material, and then I think of how would I explain this material to somebody that doesn't understand it, that doesn't know it, that hasn't read what I'm reading right now. And I found that to be a particularly effective way to study. It's always worked for me. So my question for everybody this week is, what study techniques do you use? And do you find them to be effective? And if they are effective, why? Based on the information that we've learned in this chapter on memory, on the last chapter on attention, and in the coming chapter for long-term memory, why do you think those particular study techniques are effective? Or if they're not effective, why do you think they're ineffective? I'd be very interested to hear everybody's opinion on that. So, until next time.